everyone, I hope you're all well. I'm just going to do a small lecture on police supervision for you to talk about some of the key concepts of this idea. So I'm going to go through what supervision is, what the skills are that you need, how do staff attitudes impact this, how to respond to and manage difficult staff and that type of stuff. So why police supervision? Well, because police supervisors have some of the most complex roles within doubtless some of the most complex organisations trying to resolve some of the most complex social problems. It's a pretty tough role and it requires a lot of different skill sets in order to do this role successfully. A lot of people talk about how sergeants need to be adept at management as well as leadership. And supervision requires both of these skills in different forms. And more importantly, I think more recently, it's become even more complex because we're trying to do that in an organisational climate where we're moving away from the very sort of traditional ideas around command and control policing and towards new ways of doing leadership that involve partnership and relationship building and so forth. So good supervision needs to be cultivated, and it's something that does require a whole organisational approach. You can't really have specific supervisors using specific types of leadership and management behaviours when others are being used elsewhere. Now, I don't want to go into a huge amount of detail about the differences between leadership and management. Cotter does this quite well, and there's quite a lot of writing that Cotter's done about how leadership and management are different and so on and so forth. But you can see the differences between here. We're talking about management, we're talking about things like planning and budgeting, organising and staffing, controlling and problem solving, although I would argue problem solving probably overlaps a little bit with leadership. Then we've got leadership, which is about establishing direction, aligning people, bringing them on board, that sort of stuff, as well as motivating and inspiring them to continue to do their jobs. So when we're talking about supervision, it involves both of these different types of practices in various forms. The expectations for supervisors are incredibly high. And I wanted to talk about this a little bit more later on in the lecture as well. But I wanted to give you a sense of this from this quote that I found. It says, "Like it or not, a first-line supervisor is a trainer, a mentor, a guide, and one in the best position to identify individual weaknesses and needs. Supervisors should be ever watchful, strive to identify areas of weakness where training can be improved, where closer control is essential also. It is a never-ending process, calls for initiative, imagination, resourcefulness. First-line supervisors particularly are the ones to observe training inadequacies, and top management should recognise them as a vital resource. The supervisor has to respond to critical issues as they arise, address them with a great deal of imagination and innovation, as well as anticipating problems. The supervisor is at the organisational focus point between officers and other managerial levels of hierarchy in the organisation, and they have to be able to do their duties with the absolute confidence and using situational adaptation. In addition to that, they also must effect change. So if the people at the top tell them that they need to do something new, they need to be able to effect that change on the ground with the officers who are at the coalface, so to speak. There is a lot involved in supervision, which is why this lecture is a little bit longer than the usual. So other ways of thinking about supervision. There's a nice little quote here from Dehaan, which I'm not going to read out to you. But there's a whole range of different types of things involved. But it's also important to remember that supervision means different things for different people. So there's a way that I get people to think about this, and it's literally completing this sentence. For me, police supervision is, and then you write out your ideas. Feel free to go ahead and do that if you like. But let's skip ahead and we'll look at what supervision is and what these different roles entail. Planning, technical advisor, problem solver, teacher, motivator, counsellor, role model, leader, coach, facilitator, disciplinarian. And this one can be one of the hardest ones for supervisors to initiate. Good supervision is the result of serious application of one's knowledge about human behaviour to a work situation. So all of that stuff that you know about policing, it's going to be useful, but there's going to be other things which are more useful for you at this stage. And you will have to learn more about how people interact and how they get along. The good supervisor develops the ability to obtain results through others. This means they need to learn the value of people as organisational assets. So good supervision is a common theme that we see in the research literature. They talk a lot about what a good supervisor entails and what they look like, the way that they interact with people. Accountability is also another common theme, and they talk about accountability. I like the way Moore and Miller does it anyway. They do this in a pyramid stance. They talk about it as in the smallest accountability they have is to their stakeholders. The mid-range accountability is certainly the organisation, and then the largest range of accountability that supervisors have is to their team, to their own personal selves and what's happening there, and to individuals on a one-to-one basis. So accountability is huge for supervisors, and it's something that that can take a while to build over a period of time, which of course doesn't help when an organisation moves people around a lot within different roles. So what are the advantages of being a police supervisor? You get more training, you get commitment to success, there's broad perspectives of departments where you become knowledgeable about how operations work, developing rapport with different people. You get different types of assignments, feelings of accomplishment, reputation, a greater chance of input into decision making, which people often appreciate, increase in pay, which is always a good thing, interpreter of policy, that's perhaps not that great a thing. You need to be more integrative, so working with others more as well as being able to bring people together, that sort of thing. Opportunity to influence and develop staff. You are part of the management, and of course you get the prestige of rank. You're required to foster innovation, which can be difficult sometimes, especially in a high pressure environment where you're constantly fed new things to do. You're constantly doing and doing and doing. You don't get much time to reflect. It is a step up in the organisation. You get to train and mentor staff yourself, and of course you get to demonstrate how you can hopefully work constructively under stress. But of course there are also many disadvantages that come with being a supervisor. I'm not going to read through all of these, but things like you have less freedom about the different actions that you take up, less commitment, I suppose, to the police union, depending on what the circumstances are. One of the hardest is being a disciplinarian, especially when to this point, you've been at a level where your colleagues are just that. They're your friends and colleagues. They're not people that you need to discipline. You need to be able to work through conflict, and that's pretty tough. But that's just a few of the disadvantages. Unfortunately, probably more than advantages. But I think overall, the role can be very rewarding. All right, so what are our major supervisory skill areas? There's this thing that they call HUTAC, H-U and then T-A-C-K, which you may or may not have heard of before. So they talk about how supervisors need to be able to develop these skills in themselves as well as in their subordinates. And most importantly, that they do this in a way where they can work through those other people and they can delegate tasks, so they're not doing everything themselves. So a supervisor must be able to obtain work objectives through the efforts of others, preferably by becoming operationally effective in one or more of the skill areas in HUTAC. So this just gives you a little bit of an overview on the slides. I've got human, tactical, effective, conceptual, and knowledge. It's a nice little summary table of everything there. and it tells you about the types of things. So human skills is mentoring, counselling, communicating. Tactical skills is very much procedures, task-oriented techniques that you'd use in policing work, which you know a lot about anyway. Affective is very much empathy, thinking about equity and equality, integrity, loyalty, that sort of stuff. At the conceptual level, very much critical analysis skills, which is why we're doing a little bit of that in your assignment. Decision making, identification of different problems and prioritisation of those, and of course solving problems. And then over in the knowledge area, scheduling training, making sure that you're doing critical review of different types of reports, as well as implementing different forms of policy. Now, I've also broken each of these categories down into a lot of detail on the slides for you. So we've got human, we're talking about motivating, developing rapport, praising people, that sort of thing, resolving conflict, etc. Tactical skills, this is what police know best. Developing technical expertise, establishing a system of control, making sure you know what your operational priorities are, and being able to delegate different tasks, and so on. Then we've got effective skills, and this is where I would argue people probably need to do a lot of work when they're first coming into a supervision role. Emotion-based characteristics for a manager, being able to modify the attitudes and emotions and values of other staff, accepting responsibility for errors, demonstrating integrity, and performing as a role model for other employees. These are all things that can take time to develop, and unfortunately it usually means that, you know, developing skills is great if you have this perfect role model there just to watch the whole time, but usually you do this through making mistakes. And then we've got conceptual skills, which I was talking through before, analysing data, understanding when we can share information and developing information, improving proficiency, so on and so forth. And then finally, we've got knowledge-based skills. Interpreting departmental policy, knowing all the workloads of staff so everything's balanced, making sure that you're fairly implementing the rules and regulations, and training and developing staff, and so on. Now, there are different types of police staff that will make these processes a little bit difficult for you, depending on what your level is at and depending on where they're at and where they sit in the organisation. You've got staff such as, and I've got these on the slides for you as well, an ascendant person that's very high achieving, that's identifies strongly with the department, has a very strong drive and work motivation and orientation, works highly effectively under pressure, receptive to feedback from superiors, and accepts rules and regulations readily. Can overcome failure by hard work. But this is in stark contrast to what we would call the indifferent staff member, working at a minimal level, resist motivational efforts overall, doesn't seek promotion, gravitates towards off-the-job satisfaction as opposed to being satisfied with their role through their job, or get satisfaction with their life through their job, as an ascendant person often is. Fairly reluctant to accept change a lot of the time, identifies with the work group and the police union, and looks at managers like you as someone that doesn't understand them. Will not seek added responsibilities, and you'll often face a lot of pushback with those types of things. Then we have the ambivalent staff member. Doesn't like to make decisions. They always ask for approval and ask for your advice on how to make decisions. Seeks constant recognition from people. Certainly is a superior work performer if the tasks are challenging, often creative and intelligent, most likely to challenge departmental policies in different ways, receptive to change, and tends to rise to a supervisory position. So these people are people that you can possibly get on side, unlike the indifferent ones. So not all supervision work is fun. There are certain ways that colleagues unfortunately can make supervision pretty difficult. And there's quite a lot of research that's attempted to conceptualise what problematic employees look like. And I thought I'd give you a very quick rundown of these. So we've got the erudites, who likes to ask people's opinions on everything. Very university and often specialist trained, uses expertise to influence decisions, and sees themselves in a class above everyone else and does not tolerate others. A little bit of advice about how to use or deal with these types of staff members. Use the expertise of these people, especially around challenging problems. Never allow them to take over leadership positions because that can be a little bit difficult. Acknowledge that the contributions that they make with praise, and leave it at that. We also have tyrants. I'm sure most of you have come across somebody who would fall into this category at some point, particularly in a police organisation. Control-oriented, can be very disrespectful and intimidating, can use personal attacks, uses coercion and fear, and uses threats to get their own way. Supervisors must deal with these people by responding at the same level, not in the same way. So you need to be able to use the same level of authority, but without using threats and so forth. You need to be able to maintain control, rebuff people's aggression, and an authoritarian response is usually needed in this instance. Then we have a little group that we call defeatists. These folks resist all new ideas, never say anything good about anyone, can be called chronic complainers, and never have solutions, and continually disrupt things that they're trying to get ahead with, and they disrupt. They're quite rigid in the way that they do things. You can usually deal with these people in a particular way. You can confront them about an issue if they've got a problem of some sort by asking for specifics. If they're whinging all the time, well, what is actually going on then? Tell me about this so I can fix it, okay? And then make them explain their position so that they actually have to give you information about what's going on and how it's affecting them and so forth. Two other little categories of difficult staff. The manipulator. I'm sure, again, you've come into contact with people like this in the past. Highly unethical, can do things to gain an advantage, use half-truths, innuendo to enhance their position, gather and impart information to lead to an advantageous position, but that often means playing people against each other. Supervisors must investigate every action of these folks and provide feedback in a way that reduces or neutralises the impact of that person. Then we have the indecisives, who can be a little bit similar to the ambivalent people I was talking about before. Impervious to praise and punishment, avoids decision making at all costs, procrastinates all the time, hides attitudes and belief, and suppresses feelings and remains neutral at all times. Supervisors need to be fairly erudite with these guys and figure out why they're stonewalling, what's going on behind the scenes that makes this person behave in a specific way. You also need to listen carefully and ask specific questions, so you're directed at clarification and so forth. And then, of course, we have the marginal performer, which we touched on before as well. Does just enough to get by, knows about all of the different things they need to do, consistently performs just below the acceptable level, has long coffee and meal breaks, habitually late or absent, treats sick leave as a right rather than a privilege, and blames the management and organisation for problems. These people can be a real pain in the backside for those who are in management positions. I just wanted to talk briefly about the expectations that people have for police supervisors, because there are a lot. There's expectations from the top. So supervisors can be seen as a type of communication link between line and higher management, okay? They're responsible for turning the concepts and visions of those in higher positions into the nuts and bolts reality of operational police work. They expect a positive attitude from you. They expect loyalty, integrity, performance, most importantly, and responsiveness. You need to be able to respond to higher management. The expectations from below are different. They expect accessibility. They expect a role model, assistance in attaining individual and organisational needs, assistance in integrating the individual into the organisation and making them feel part of the culture. Creation of a fair work environment that provides job satisfaction, fair appraisals as they're going through and doing their work, help in developing skills, even if that does mean, pointing out deficiencies in a fair and even manner, identification and maximisation of talents that can result in growth, providing information needed to accomplish tasks, and providing support in becoming a productive employee overall. If you can do all of these types of things, you're going to have a fairly happy workforce. But you can see the expectations of people at the top are different to the expectations that people have that are working for you when you're a supervisor. There's a whole range of different functions that are performed by supervisors as well when relating to subordinates in particular. And these are related to what I was talking about before, resolving conflicts, particularly between citizens and officers, responding to subordinate inquiries, conducting internal investigations, which I would raise questions about, but nonetheless, coach the subordinates, making sure that you're ameliorating conflict between subordinates and between citizens, as I was talking about before. You need to be able to serve as an archetype of professionalism at all times and, engage with them so that they're trained and developed as human beings. Expectations from the side. So what do supervision peers expect of other police supervisors? Careful consideration of how their actions impact others. Cooperation, coordination, focusing on work, not personalities. This is really important. Joint problem resolution. So if you do have issues that are impacting you across these work areas, give them a call and have a chat so you can work on it together. Positive working relationships are a must. And sharing of information and ideas will always make your job that little bit easier. Hopefully that was helpful and has given you a little bit of background about what police supervision is. If you've got any questions, as per usual, don't hesitate to get in touch with me at any time. Be wary of the context that's influencing what's going on and how you do your role. And I think this is quite well summarised in this final quote that I've given you. It is unrealistic to believe that an organisation will ever be perfect in the sense that everyone is happy, that there are no abuses of authority, or that there is no tension between the various elements of that organisation. It is critically important, however, that the police leadership create a productive and satisfying work environment while they're still maintaining the highest possible performance standards. And this is something that can be really difficult to achieve, especially if you're new. Draw on the people around you. Find a good mentor to help you through the process who's well known as a good mentor by a lot of people, not just a few. If you can do this, you'll do fairly well in these types of roles. Just so you know, on the last slide in my presentation, I have all of the references that I used for this presentation for you. Anyway, on that note, I hope that was helpful and I will chat to you all really soon. See you later.